Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you to the Center for Climate Repair and all of the collaborators who made this very important conference happen. And when I was invited to give this talk, I guess the most obvious thing would be to tell you a little bit about the work that we at DSG, the Alliance for Just Deliberation, started on geoengineering, started doing in the Arctic. But the talk is called The Way Ahead. So I decided to take a step back and tell you a little bit about what are the principles and the sort of the moral compass that brought me to this type of work, and that I think we should all have in mind whenever we talk about geoengineering, because I think these are the core values and ideals that should inform us in any type of research or policy discussions that we have. Um, and I guess, like many or most of us here in this room, I don't come from the Arctic. I come from Brazil. So, apart from bringing you nice pictures from Brazil, I just wanted to tell you these are the three biomes where I grew up in, and that sort of um, raised me and informed my ecological and political thought. So the first two are from the Atlantic rainforest. I know that in Brazil, lots of people, or most of people around the world, always think about the Amazon, but the Atlantic rainforest is actually one of the three biomes here are a lot more damage than the Amazon. So we should also talk about them, because we know that what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. But yeah, so the first two are from the Atlantic rainforest. That's the coast of Brazil. It's where Portugal and the Netherlands and France arrived 500 years ago, and that's why we have kind of almost only 10% of that biome left, which is really sad. Then the one on the bottom left right there is called Cerrado. That's the tropical savanna. And that one is actually the most impacted by climate change in Brazil. Even though that's a nice body of water there, it struggles a lot with droughts, and the projections are only worse for the future. And this one right here is called Caatinga. That's the tropical desert that we have there, even though it's very green in that picture. But yeah, it's also struggling a lot. And because I grew up in those very rich environments, I always understood that I would be working to try to preserve them, because growing up in different parts of Brazil, I could see that they were being destroyed. Like, I could see destruction, right? Just like friends from the Arctic can see that the ice is melting. And that led me to activism, just like my friends from Operatio Arctis. This is where I come from. And it's from this activism standpoint that I joined the discussions on geoengineering. So I'm sorry you don't read Portuguese, but I found out that I still had saved in my Google Photos these Instagram stories from the first conference I went that talked about geoengineering. It was called the International Symposium on Climate Engineering. That was 6 years ago in the Brazilian Academy of Sciences. I don't know if any of you were there, but you can see the classic napkin diagram. That's Alan Robach, who's not here with us. But yeah, that's when I first heard about it, and it really shocked me that nature and the environment weren't being put as weren't being framed as a reason why we talk about solar geoengineering, nor were humans. It was very much focused on science, and it really annoyed me. Like I said, coming from this activism background, that we weren't bringing those different justice and human rights perspective. And so 6 years ago, I decided that I wouldn't be leaving this field at all. It was an information that I just couldn't um, unlearn or not think about it. And so here I am. And 6 years later, this is the field that we're in. Small but growing, fast growing field. And these are points that lots of people have already mentioned in the past 2 days. Um, and I guess we heard a lot on the last point of outdoor activity. We've seen examples of this happening in practice. Um, so I won't spend a lot of time in here. And this brings us to lots of media headlines, and I think this is only about to increase in the coming future. And so we should collectively think about what headlines do we want to see? I hope we start seeing more positive headlines because that hasn't usually been the case. And some challenges that colleagues here on stage have already talked about before as well. And I think the slide was a bit, oh no, everything is in there. Good. So we've already touched upon lots of these topics, but I guess for my talk, for my limited time here, I will be looking more into governance issues that can be informed by a couple of points. And I mean, the organization I work with has justice in its name. And why do we think that talking about justice is important? Because, well, we know other scientific areas in the past have created lots of harm, both to humans and nature. So that's why I told you, I think these are, should be, principles that always inform us, but it hasn't been the case always. And so governance is kind of like this monster, right? That everyone either says like it's impossible to govern SRM, but I think that conferences like these are already a way to try to address this problem. And inside governance, I guess a big conundrum that we have is talking about engagement and inclusion. We know that fieldworks that have failed before, maybe one of the reasons why that happened was precisely because there wasn't participation and inclusion. And this is a table of levels of engagement focused on research, but I guess it can be applied in other areas when we talk about SRM as well. I don't know if you can read it, but it basically says that we have 5 levels of engagement, which are not necessarily an order that you follow. But when you're trying to think of how research is conducted, you should try and think on which level you stand. So first of all, we have inform, which is kind of this, the participants are on this passive um, uh, situation where someone only tells you like, this is it, this is the technology, period. But then on a second level, you consult people. You ask, what do you think about this? Do you think it's a good idea or not? And then you move on to involving people. You not only ask their opinions, but you try to think of questions together. And then you might start collaborating and trying to make the decisions together, not just asking, like, what is a good research question, but how can we build this research really together? And finally, I guess it's something we should always strive for is empowering. I know this word has lost a lot of meaning, but I think it still holds true that when citizens are empowered in any discussions in our society, we have a healthier democracy. And this is very much tied to justice, not only climate justice, but also intergenerational justice, because we know, right, that the climate crisis will impact the generations to come. Um, and so I don't really bring answers, I bring more questions, I guess, which I hoped I had the answers for, but we don't. That's why we're here trying to figure this out together. Um, and I think that human rights considerations are often absent from talking about geoengineering, but it's critical. We know that on one hand, it might actually be very positive when you think of enjoyment of basic human rights, like access to water, access to food, but we know that the impacts could also be very detrimental to human rights. And so there are also different levels of human rights or categories that we could talk about. Um, and one of them being positive is also the rights to research, which not many people talk about, but the UN has talked about this in other contentious areas of science as well, that if human beings want to have access to this type of information, then why shouldn't we try looking into this? Um, and I guess starting to wrap up, why are both justice and human rights considerations important? Um, we know, like I said before, that we've had failed attempts of research on geoengineering, and maybe one reason is because we simply didn't engage with people. Um, and that's not to say that it's an easy thing to do, right? Like we've seen that there are different levels of engagement, and it's definitely not something that you can do in one day and that's it. It takes time. So the sooner we start doing it, the better. And this is actually helpful for the research community because then you can actually do your research. And the second point here to conclude is just informing people isn't enough. If you're not, informing people about your research isn't enough if they actually have zero knowledge on what SRM means. I think it was Justus that, or someone else that mentioned in the research they did here in the UK that people are like, I don't really have an opinion on this because I don't know what you're asking me. Um, and so I would really advise you to encourage capacity building exercises and programs, because without that, we won't really go anywhere. And again, like I said, I don't bring answers, I bring questions with me as well. So now, in the time that we have left, I also welcome more questions that we can try answering together. Thank you.